So I'll welcome those of you who are participating through our Zoom conference. I'm just giving a minute or two to make sure all the participants have come online and can hear and see. There are in excess of 300 of you this evening, so just bear with us for a moment or two while those numbers climb. Okay, I'm seeing we've sort of leveled out at our numbers. Now they're climbing still, but we'll begin. Folks online and the small number of guests we have here this evening, I want to welcome you to the Seneca Valley School District School Board Action Meeting for November 9th, 2020. For those of you that might be dialing in for the first time, my name is Jim Nickel. I currently serve as Board President for the Seneca Valley School Board. I want to call this meeting to order with a brief tap of the gavel. As we do so, I would like to take a moment of reflection prior to our Pledge of Allegiance. So if you could join me, please. Thank you, everyone. For our pledge this evening, I'll welcome Ms. Linda Andraci, our Director of Communications, to our microphone for our I Led the Pledge student.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, everyone. Our I Led the Pledge student this evening is Allison Noto. She is a fourth grader at Evans City Elementary. Everyone welcome Allison. So Allison is here tonight with her mother, Sharon. She's behind the camera back there. Her father, Jason, and her brother, Luke. Luke is a first grader at Evans City Elementary School. Allison was nominated this evening by Evans City Elementary Principal Lori Pendred and Assistant Principal Andrew Teddy. And I'd like to welcome and thank Ms. Pendred for being here this evening in support of Allison. So thank you. Allison tells us her favorite subject at school is science. She enjoys watching the Weather Channel, learning new things at school, and being with her friends and family, and helping to take care of her beagle
and a basset.
And basset hound. And what is your beagle and basset hound name?
So my beagle's name is Daisy, and my basset's name is Ruby.
Awesome. I understand your mom tells me you're also a blue belt in Taekwondo.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, I will say Allison has endured several medical challenges in her life, including 7 reconstructive surgeries to her ear. But despite all of that, she is probably one of the strongest, most resilient young women you will ever meet. She tells us her goal when she grows up, if you haven't noticed by her mask, is to attend Penn State University. We are.
So the fact that I'm a Pitt fan is a problem? Okay, sorry about that.
And then Allison, if you want to share with everyone, when you graduate from Penn State, what is your degree going to be and what do you want to do?
So I want to be a meteorologist after I graduate.
That's excellent. So tonight we're going to test out her broadcasting skills by having her say the Pledge of Allegiance. So I would ask everyone here and at home, if you are able, to please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Allison, when you're ready.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That was excellent. You projected so well. Very good. Congratulations. So earlier, before you all came in this evening, we presented Allison with her medal and her I Led the Pledge shirt and some Seneca swag, as well as her brother. Her brother got a bag of swag as well. So once again, we thank Allison and her family for being here tonight. Excellent job.
Thank you so much. It is always fun to start the meeting this way. So we look forward to seeing you as you go through yours at Seneca and joining us for some different things, perhaps maybe as a member of student council, just to plug that into your head. So again, thank you. And Mom and Dad, thank you for being here. Thanks, brother. The brother got a swag bag as well, Linda? Nice. That works out good. Excellent. Thank you very much. With that, Lisa, if you would please call the roll for the meeting.
Ms. Bradel. Here. Mr. DiTullio.
Here.
Ms. Harrison. Here. Mr. Hester.
Here.
Mr. Jacobs.
Here.
Mr. Nickel.
Present.
Mr. Peterson.
Here.
Mr. Widdowson.
Here.
Ms. Whittle. She is absent.
She is absent, yes. Okay, thank you, Lisa. So folks, this is, again, for some of you who may be listening in for the first time, this is our action meeting. We will be taking action on a variety of different topics. We do start the meeting with a few information reports, however. They are on the agenda, the first of which would be Ms. Andrade, still at the microphone, with both student staff recognition as well as some dates to remember. So Ms. Andrade, please.
Thank you again, Mr. President. We have one student staff recognition item this evening. Rashika Rahman, who is a fifth grader at Evans City Middle School, recently wrote and published Sonia's Journal, A Stream of Thoughts. The book features Sonia and her sisters and their many adventures, including secret vacations, hair terror, zany pranks, and so much more. Her year-long journal is a breezy trip into the world of a young girl and her stream of thoughts. Ms. Rahman and her book, which can be purchased on Amazon, were recently featured on KDKA TV's Evening News, and we congratulate Rashika for a job well done. Under dates to remember, November 11th, this Wednesday, is Veterans Day. November 13th is the Seneca Valley Academy Choice end of first trimester for grades K through 6. And then the end of trimester for everyone else, K to 6, is November 18th. November 20th is the first day of all PIAA winter sports. Thanksgiving break will take place November 25th through the 30th. That is a district holiday, so there is no school for students and staff. And then finally, we will return here on December 7th for the school board reorganization meeting. That takes place at 5 p.m. And that is all I have, Mr. President, unless you have questions.
I have none. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Andrade? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll turn to our agency reports. We did just the other day have a meeting of the Butler County Area VOTEC. I'll turn to Mr. Peterson for some detail. It was a fairly straightforward general meeting. We did have a pretty active executive session, but I'll let you take it from here, Mr. Peterson.
It was. Things are going well in spite of the fact that the VOTEC is closed.
Yeah.
And we had a rather lengthy discussion about their emergency plan and how it's implemented. Dr. Heiler seems to be doing well. Her new assistant principal, whose name has just escaped me.
Our principal, Jared Ryan?
Ryan?
Jared, yeah, Jared Ryan.
Mr. Ryan,
He's our
okay.
new principal.
He really seems to be grabbing the reins and
Yeah.
moving right in to support her. The highlight of the meeting, however, came at the end when great thanks were given to Mr. Nickel in his last meeting on the Joint Operating Committee for all of his contributions. His sharp eye always on the finances of the organization. And a round of applause was held. And Mr. Nickel, it's going to be hard carrying on without you. I'm sure
Well,
Mr. Jacobs will do a good job.
He will. Thank you.
Indeed.
I think that the two of you together will do an excellent job. Fred, you've been with me over there now for 3 years, four. So yeah, you're well versed, and I have every belief that you and Mr. Jacobs are going to do a fabulous job. I stay, of course, as an alternate, and will be there to support you in any way that I can. Any questions from anybody on the board with regards to the VOTEC? Okay, we'll turn to IU4, Mr. DiTullio.
I do not have an update this time from our last meeting. I gave you the update. We won't have a meeting till later on this month.
Okay, thank you. Forgot about that. Appreciate that. We'll turn to legislative. Obviously, some pretty significant times and winds blowing in our country, but anything more specific to the state of Pennsylvania or education or other matters, Mr. Peterson?
Just a couple of things. There was an election last Tuesday, in case you missed it. Mr. Biden, or President-elect Biden, has had a lot of good things to say, both in the run-up and some of his post-election comments about supporting public schools. I think we're probably in for a good ride with him, although, you know, it's an arm's length relationship we have with the federal government. At the state level, there's not been any activity because of the election. However, the lawmakers will be reconvened. They don't always come back after the elections. They will be reconvened to try to sort out the last details of the state's budget, which is not totally settled. You might remember the budget year always ends at the end of June, and there was not sure what the right word is,
Is it a
not
temporary
temporary.
measure?
There was a budget passed with a lot of footnotes, so those footnotes have to be cleaned up. Let me just put it that way. The other thing that happened, not really legislative, more administrative, but I reported, I think 2 months ago, about a House bill that was in the process regarding separating victims of sexual assault from the alleged perpetrators of that sexual assault. The governor did sign that bill, and it will go into law, I think, within 60 days. Coincidentally, of course, we had a lot of discussion on our agenda tonight about our sexual harassment policies. But that is one issue that is now active, and we will have to regard that in our future policy updates. And that's all I have to report, Mr. Nichol.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Does anybody have any questions with regards to that report? Any comments? Okay, we'll move on. 2 last information reports. The first of which is reiterating that we are in receipt of all of our financial reports. They are in our backup. They are for operations, senior high activities, intermediate high activities, middle school activities, athletics, food service, tax collections, and capital projects funds. To the extent you've had any questions on any of those items, I would hope that you would reach out to Ms. Bertner to receive your feedback and your answers. We'll turn then to our last information report before we get into some of our action items. That would be a COVID-19 update by Dr. Vitale. So with that, Dr. Vitale, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Nichol. First, I will begin by saying that we've been told all along from the Pennsylvania Department of Education and the Department of Health that if and when the county transmission rate designation moves, that they will call a meeting of every Butler County superintendent or the county that's moving, and they will call that meeting typically on a Sunday, send you an invitation, and we will tune in on a Monday morning. That did happen late yesterday. Every Butler County superintendent was asked to meet with the Pennsylvania Department of Education and the Department of Health this morning at 10 a.m. At that 10 a.m. meeting, the Department of Health did not show because they were too busy, but they did send statistical data, and because the Pennsylvania Department of Education, they've done many of these meetings, they were prepared to present to us. During that time, they informed us that the Pennsylvania Department of Health has moved Butler County to a substantial designation. Butler County was at moderate for some time, even since school had started. PDE is now recommending to school districts that we look at a hybrid or full remote model. 38 counties moved to the substantial list across Pennsylvania this morning. 38 counties are on the substantial list across Pennsylvania. 3 that were in the meeting with me today: Butler County superintendents, Bedford County superintendents, and Adams County superintendents. The Department of Health used the following metrics to move this rating to substantial, and they shared those with us through the Pennsylvania Department of Education. The first metric they look deeply at and track is called incident rate, which you've heard me talk about in public. And that is the incident rate in your county, in this case, Butler County. It's cases per 100,000 within the last 7 days. If your county exceeds 100 new cases over the last 7 days, that is one way that your county can be moved to substantial. Currently, Butler County is at 111.2 new cases in the last 7 days, in the last capture of that data. They often will compare those 7 days to the prior 7 days as well. The next item they look at is called PCR percent positivity rate. For those who have been tested for COVID, you know what a PCR test is. We've talked about that, but I'll repeat for those who aren't familiar. A rapid test is given on the spot. It's about 86 to 87% effective. And in that case, effective at the sensitivity rate on the rapid test is about 86, 87% in many of our testing sites, depending on the rapid test. If the rapid is positive, some doctors recommend that there is no further action necessary, but other doctors recommend that then you go to the next test, which is called the PCR, polymer chain reaction test. That one, as you can imagine, is much more detailed, much more reliable, and much more valid. If you're negative on a rapid test, many doctors are sending, especially if you're symptomatic, they are sending the test to be PCR tested to that second test. So in this county, the PCR percent positivity rate is at 8.1%. If you get to 10%, that's another way they can move you to substantial. It's not and, it's or. So we already met the substantial rate on incidence rate. The next item they look at, which is interesting because I haven't seen this reported publicly, but they shared with us today, but I can't find the website. I'll be interested to see when they send us more of this data. They look at outbreak rate, and they look at 2 or more cases in a congregate setting. Now, the general public, including me, we think congregate settings are only nursing care homes. That's not the case. Congregate settings, as classified by the Department of Health, can be workplaces, can be businesses, schools, or specific events. They look at the rate of infection at those types of places. If there are 2 or more cases in a congregate care setting, they investigate that further, and they certainly contact trace on all of those cases. They also look at community spread rate, which I did not realize they were tracking. And again, all of these data points are based off the contact tracing that the Department of Health is doing. At this point, they did not close the data on Butler County. We should be receiving that within, we thought we would get it by the end of today. We did not. But again, that's another or category. And they tell us they are watching schools. The next item they look at is age breakdown with positive cases. I did see this data last Saturday. I shared it in last Monday's school board meeting, but this is where they take, and I saw that data as a result of the state press release, where they take age groups and age bands, and then they tell the public based on contact tracing, based on positivity rate, this is where we're seeing the age differences. And you've heard me report that before, but I haven't seen that yet for Butler County. So I'm looking forward to getting that data that the DOH has promised us. The next item that this board is constantly looking at as well, and we should be looking at in our community, is hospital preparedness and how many people are in the hospital with COVID at Butler Hospital and in regional hospitals. So if you go to the Pennsylvania Department of Health dashboard, you can find all of this data, incident rate, PCR percent positivity. You can sort it out by county. You will see that Butler County has been moved to substantial as of today. You can't yet see outbreak rate or community spread rate, but when I get that, I'll be glad to share that with the board or share that publicly if people desire. And the age breakdown with positive cases you can see on the state Pennsylvania Department of Health website. We are in our first week of substantial as a county. So at this point, the Pennsylvania Department of Education is recommending to all schools that are in the substantial area, not just Seneca Valley, but any school in Butler County or any of the counties, those 38 counties that are now on substantial, they are recommending hybrid or full remote, but they also recommended that in the moderate level as well. So that would not necessarily change. They're telling us if we go into a second week of substantial, I will be called to another meeting on Monday morning. So will every other county and or superintendent in those counties. And if we go to a second week of substantial, they're going to recommend full remote K-12 for the entire district. Again, these are recommendations, not requirements, and it is a local decision. However, the Department of Health reminded us through the Pennsylvania Department of Education representatives that they do have the authority to move us into full remote if they can prove there is school transmission and or if they need to protect the public. So that is important to note. The next item I want to point out in my COVID-19 update is when you look at the Seneca Valley dashboard that has been updated. Normally we don't update it on the weekends, but we had a number of cases over the weekend, so we wanted the public to see it. It was updated over the weekend and it's been updated twice today. If you go to that dashboard, it was updated at 4:58 p.m. today. And we are sitting on the following: 15 active student cases K to 12, kindergarten through 12th, 13 inactive student cases, which means they've been cleared and or completed their 14-day quarantine. 2 active staff cases across the district. You'll notice a number of those staff cases came off the dashboard today because they've either, one, successfully recovered and or did their 14-day quarantine. Total active cases in the district, that is staff and students combined, we're looking at 17, and 23 inactive total district cases, student and staff, since we opened. I do want to go over the breakdowns because they're important for boards, especially this school board, to make decisions about instructional models. At the senior high, we left on Friday with 5 active cases. 4 more cases are now active, which brings us to 9. So my team with the nurses have been contact tracing all weekend. And that included a Sunday meeting yesterday at noon to go over where were we with cases, were there any additional actions that we needed to take or recommend to the board. So that is concerning, but in the same token, we have approximately 1,000 students in that building. So that is important to keep in mind. At the intermediate high school, we have 1 active student case and 3 inactive cases, no staff cases, thank goodness, and I'm grateful for no staff cases. Ryan Gloyer Middle School, we now have 3 active student cases and 3 inactive student cases, 0 active staff cases, which I'm grateful for, but remember, they have been closed and they were closed for 14 days. So now their active staff have moved to the inactive category, and we have 6 inactive staff cases. Evans City Middle School, 0 in every category. That's a grades 5, 6 building. Hayne Middle School, 0 active student cases, 1 inactive student case, 0 active staff, 0 inactive staff. Cases by elementary schools, we are currently sitting on 1 active case at Hayne Elementary that was just recently added. And we are looking at 1 active staff case at Evans City Elementary. The rest are zeros. Seneca Valley Academy of Choice. This is an interesting category for us to track because for the most part, none of these students are here. These are full-time Academy of Choice students. They don't come to any physical sites. We do have some students who take 1 or 2 classes, and they did this pre-COVID. That was a choice. And so some of those students do come to our buildings, and they would be included in the building count, not here. So this active student case is someone who's never come to school but reported it to us. And for that, we're grateful for the data. But it's interesting to look at the active staff case at 1 and inactive staff cases at 2. Now, those teachers do rotate in and out of our buildings depending on the day. But I think it's interesting, you know, when people say, well, go to full remote, you won't have any cases. That is not the situation, at least in that program or in other programs that we've watched in full remote in other school districts. So clearly, you're not going to stop COVID. It's all a matter of mitigations and what can you do to balance and keep people safe. So we've reviewed the dashboard. I would encourage you to continue to look at that. The other item I want to go over, another data source, because it's important that we look at not one data source, but many. In the elementary K-6, you have heard me review the cases that are on the dashboard. We have seen very few positive cases in our elementary schools, and the age distribution of COVID positive gets higher in ages 13 and up. That's what the research is showing us so far. Further, with contact tracing we've done in our elementary schools, almost every case has been family transmission or household contacts. We have no proof of school transmission. Now, what we don't know, again, reminding you, new virus, we're still learning every day. The whole world is learning new information every day. We don't know if we have more elementary students that are asymptomatic and not getting tested. Why would they? They're not symptomatic. And we don't know how many parents have chosen not to test elementary students who may be symptomatic and instead keep them at home for 14 days. So there's no way to know all of that data. We only operate on what we know and confirm. As a matter of fact, the COVID cases listed on our dashboard, those are not people that are sick without a test. Those are confirmed COVID cases as a result of a rapid and/or PCR test. Student quarantines. This is becoming more and more concerning in this district. 5 days a week in person has caused significant close contacts. This causes a 14-day quarantine by the Department of Health, not by us. When I was looking at these numbers this weekend, we were sitting on about 180 students, primarily secondary students, senior high, intermediate high school, that were being quarantined based on a close contact. Not that they're sick, but they were sitting near someone who was later deemed to be COVID positive. That's very concerning for us. And I know Mr. Nickel will talk more about that. But as of tonight, our lead nurse administrator reported that number has gone up to 400 students in quarantine based on a close contact at school. We have additional students that are on quarantine from the Department of Health because of a family exposure. That does not mean they're sick, but that does mean they have to stay home for 14 days. Even if they get 2 negative tests, they have to stay home and quarantine per the Department of Health for 14 days. That's becoming very disruptive. We do know that if we were in the cohort model, most, not all, but most of those quarantines would not happen, because in the cohort model, we can spread out, we can social distance, while the quarantine might still happen at lunch when they have their mask down and they're behind plexiglass. The Department of Health does not consider plexiglass a complete barrier. They did early on. They changed their mind on that. And early on, we were told as long as students have masks on, they would not be considered close contact. The Department of Health has also changed their mind on that because they said we cannot guarantee that people are wearing their mask properly. The next item I have a concern about that I want to report with the COVID-19 is staffing. We have a number of teachers, as you saw, that are out due to COVID, but we have a number impacted by quarantines. We're not the only district. Every district I speak to have a number of teachers out on quarantine due to a family member, due to a sick child. If they have a sick child, we also ask the staff member not to come to school until they can rule out COVID with their child. So because we're very strict about self-assessments in the morning, temperature checks by all of our employees, and we don't want any staff member, that includes me, coming to work symptomatic, COVID or not. And so attendance and staffing is becoming more and more difficult in our district and every district. A neighboring district closed for the last 2 days because they had a significant lack of staff. We are lucky here in that early on, our teacher professional union came to us and said, we think there are going to be a lot of folks who are faced with quarantines throughout the year. We think it could happen more than once. And isn't it a shame that a teacher can't come to school if, just because they're being quarantined or possibly they were a close contact, but yet they want to continue to teach and they're well? Would you sign a memorandum of understanding with us? I brought that to the school board. And because of the proactive nature of our professional teachers union, we have a memorandum of understanding in place where our teachers can teach from home if they are not sick and they are well enough to do that, but only for those who are under a quarantine, and they sign an affidavit for that. Not many districts have that. So we're lucky that our teacher professional union leaders had the foresight to come to us about that. And we're lucky that our school board agreed to that. And so all of us working collaboratively together is how we're getting through this. The next item that is very concerning are hospital numbers. All you have to do is look at the dashboard or go to the Pennsylvania Department of Health and drill down on local hospitals, not just Butler, but in our region. Every single hospital in the region, I don't want to speak for them, but I can tell you their numbers are up significantly. They have significant staffing issues because even if they have surge units, that does not mean they have RNs or respiratory therapists. Our numbers at the Butler Hospital have gone up at least 4 times the amount of what we've seen even at the peaks in April and July. I won't speak for the CEO or the doctors there, but I can tell you I'm on many calls and many hospitals are getting concerned. I know that the Butler Hospital will be holding a virtual event this Thursday for community leaders and business leaders to talk about this. So I will let those bullet points up to them. But as we've said early on, we need to pay attention to ICU number of COVID patients in ICUs, number of COVID patients in the hospital. And we certainly need to pay attention to the death count, and that is rising from all of our hospitals as reported to the Pennsylvania Department of Health. County numbers, another data point. Butler is up another 208 cases just this weekend alone when I looked at 10 a.m. this morning. That's probably changed since this time. Zip code numbers, as you know, I track every zip code. Lisa, who's sitting here at the table with us, Lisa Mislin, tracks these zip code numbers for us every single day by drilling into the Pennsylvania Department of Health website. We pull every zip code number that Seneca Valley students live in this county. We are up by more than 50 cases just since Friday. When we started school, we were less than 4 cases over a rolling 14-day average. Now we're seeing 50 cases just since Friday. Local control. Right now, this school board has a level of control, and they have a decision to make tonight about what is our responsibility with the community numbers and the community transmission. It is our duty, it is my belief and our duty to do our best to play a part in bringing the numbers down in our community and our county, but we cannot do it alone. If communities don't cooperate, if communities and individuals don't think about their own actions, and I'm not judging those, everyone is tired of this pandemic. Many are angry, many are frustrated. We are all there right with you. But if we don't make some changes, we will not be able to keep our schools open. At this point, we have local control, but we may not in the next few weeks. So I need the community's help. I need us all to think about our own individual actions. The next item, it is my opinion that temporary closures are reactive. We knew this could happen when we agreed to 5 days a week. It's well documented in our public sessions. Cohort is proactive. With the uptick in our county and zip code, it is time for us to be proactive again, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vitale, for all the detail. Folks on the board, we could either have some conversation around this now, but I'd prefer we do obviously have a motion on the table, or will have a motion on the table later. So to the extent you have any questions, or if there's some dialogue around this update, unless anyone would speak against, I would prefer we wait until that motion and we can get into some dialogue at that time. Okay, folks online, we now move into the action component of our agenda. As we begin into that section, that's traditionally where we allow members of the community, members of our constituency, our stakeholders to speak. We do have one request this evening. It's a gentleman who's joined us here in the meeting tonight. His name is Aaron Johnson. Mr. Johnson has a question about COVID-19 procedures. And Mr. Johnson, we're going to welcome you to the microphone by all means. This is typically a period where we allow members of our community to voice their opinion. It doesn't tend to get into a lot of back and forth and Q&A, but we certainly want to hear what's on your mind, hear what your question may be, and to the extent we can respond to you, we certainly will. Mr. Johnson lives on Samuel Drive in Cranberry Township. I believe I'm actually, of the 9 of us, your specific representative on the board, considering where you live, but we sort of represent, not sort of, we represent the entire community. So I'll welcome you up to the microphone for your question, right up here at the lectern. Well, we'll welcome you up. We typically give around 4 minutes for some conversation, for words that you have to say. Maybe you have just one question and it takes 30 seconds, but we'll give you the microphone at this point.
Actually, I just want to say good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here. And after listening to Dr. Vitale, pretty much my question was answered.
Okay.
So thank you very much for all the information. Thank you for the feedback, and thank you for all your efforts. My question was answered. So
Okay. All
thank you
right.
very much.
Well, we hope you stick around. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We appreciate you being here this evening. Okay, with that, we'll move into our action items. The first 3 or 4 I'll begin with. I will make a motion, which is to approve the minutes that are provided in our backup. They are for the work session on October 5th of this year and the regular meeting on October 12th of this year. For our treasurer's report, also included in our backup. For our general fund bills, the detail of which is in our backup, they are for a total of $1,477,617.35. And finally, for construction fund bills, also out in our backup, and a grand total of $2,481,124.24. That is my motion. Could I seek a second from a member of the board? Ms. Harrison, thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Is there any dialogue with regards to those items? Okay, seeing none. Lisa, if you would please call the roll for those.
Mr. Hester,
Yes.
Mr. Widdowson,
Yes.
Ms. Bradel. Yes. Mr. DiTullio,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes.
and Mr. Nichol.
Yes,
Motion carries with with 8 in the affirmative and 1 absent.
thank you, Lisa. We'll turn to administration action items. That would be Mr. DiTullio. Mr. DiTullio and I dialogued a little bit earlier this evening. The motion that he's going to make will separate out item F, which is the instructional model change for secondary students. So you'll go through items A through F, A through E, and then we'll talk about and do a motion separately for the other item.
Absolutely.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that we approve items A through E, and I'll detail those now. This would be board policies. To approve the following board policies as provided in our backup. Policy 902, Publication Program, revised first reading. Policy number 903, Public Participation in Board Meetings, revised first reading. Policy 907, School Visitors, revised first reading. And then these policies we are going to look to retire. Policy number 248, Sexual Harassment Students, retire first and final reading. Policy number 348, Sexual Harassment Administrative Employees, retire first and final reading. Policy number 448, Sexual Harassment Professional Employees, retire first and final reading. Policy number 548, Sexual Harassment Classified Employees, retire first and final reading. Policy 248.1, Unlawful Harassment Students, retire first and final reading. Policy number 348.1, Unlawful Harassment Administrative Employees, retire first and final reading. Policy number 448.1, Unlawful Harassment Professional Employees, retire first and final reading. And finally, the last one we're going to retire is policy number 548.1, Unlawful Harassment Classified Employees, retire first and final reading. Also, we'll look to approve the resolution to sue Jewel Labs Incorporated to approve the commencement of a civil suit as part of a multi-district litigation against Jewel Labs Incorporated and other distributors and marketers of vaping products arising from the design, marketing, and advertising of vaping products targeting minors, and for such purposes, approve the contingent fee arrangement with France Law Group, APLC, Dillon, McCandless, King, Coulter, and Graham, LLP, and Tucker Arnsberg, PC, as provided in our backup. VOTEC JOC representative and alternate to appoint Mr. Frederick Peterson Jr. and Mr. Michael Jacobs as the Butler County Area Vocational Technical School Joint Operating Committee, BCAVTS JOC representatives, and Mr. James Nichol as the BCAVTS JOC alternate. The agreement for Slippery Rock Transition Achievement Program to approve the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education Agreement for Slippery Rock Transition Achievement Program as provided in our backup. And finally, item E is the Racial Engagement Strategies LLC proposal to approve the Racial Engagement Strategies LLC proposal for services through June of 2021, pending solicitor review and provided in our backup.
Thank you for the motion. Mr. DiTullio, may I have a second from the board? Mr. Peterson, thank you. I will ask members of the board if you have any questions around or discussion regarding any of these items, A through E. Mr. DiTullio, please.
I would just like to point out again, since we do have so many people and some of them might be new from last week, that the policies that are being retired have basically been superseded by policies that we have passed over the last few months. So I just want to point that out, that we still have sexual harassment policies and things like that in place. These are just antiquated, now need to be retired.
Thank you, Mr. DiTullio. Anyone else? Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Nichol. I have a question about the Jewel Labs agreement. paragraph 6 or item 6 in there is regarding their expenses. It seems like a pretty open-ended list. I'm wondering if we know of the mechanisms that are used to govern the approval of those expenses. I did note that there's I think a single sentence in there that says that there will be a return of expense dollars if I'm losing my train of thought now. The return of expense dollars, if the project ends and there have been expenses reimbursed. I need a little clarification on what's the governor on spending money there.
And if I could, before you respond, Mr. Hoffman, just for those of you, again, who might not have been in our meeting last week, we discussed this at length. The district is considering, and with approval this evening, will join a lawsuit that is in motion already. We would be joining is it the class action or the mass action, Mr. Hoffman?
Mass action.
Mass action suit. And as part of that, we've reviewed the specific agreement that would bring us into that suit. Mr. Peterson just has a question with regards to one specific component of it. With that, I'll let Mr. Hoffman respond.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nickel. First of all, understand that the district is not outlaying any monies toward expenses. Only if there is a positive monetary recovery in favor of the district from that sum of money, any expenses attributable and allocated to the district would come out of that pot. In terms of the expenses themselves, there's basically two kinds. One would be expenses specifically incurred in relation to representing Seneca Valley School District. And then the second would be the shared expenses incurred by the attorneys in representing the group, if you will. So those expenses would be pro rata allocated among the different districts based upon any recovery that they would get in proportion to the overall recovery. So in terms of the actual expenses themselves, Mr. Peterson, there really isn't any pre-approval process. If, again, there's a recovery and we are asked to reimburse expenses, we'll have the opportunity to see what those are, to ask for substantiation for them. And at that point in time, we can resolve any disputes regarding expenses sought to be attributed to the district.
And Mr. Hoffman, if there is no recovery, are we on the hook for those expenses?
We are not.
Okay.
Again, the district would only pay expenses out of any positive recovery that we would receive.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Anyone else have a question? Ms. Bradel, please.
Thank you, Mr. Nickel.
Sure.
I was just wondering if I could get a little bit of a summary on the Slippery Rock Transition Achievement Program. I don't recall if that was on our agenda last year, if this program's been in place or it's new. Very interesting. And I also would like to know how it's going to work during the pandemic here, if it's all virtual or how we're working with this program with Slippery Rock.
I see that Mr. Miller's already taken his microphone off mute. So Mr. Miller, if you would please respond.
Yes, good evening, everyone. The Slippery Rock, the transition program was on the agenda last year. We've been partnering with Slippery Rock for at least the last 3 years. And, you know, it's a job skills training program for our students with special needs. They attend the university 3, perhaps 4 days per week, just depending on which program the students choose. They do a variety of tasks and activities that are related to job skills that will foster independence for them once they finish with us here at Seneca Valley. It gives them experience on a campus, a college campus. They work with students of the university doing these job-related skills. So your question regarding what it looks like currently, students are attending in person. We send students up to the university with a job coach. Once they get to the university, they are escorted to their different job-related areas by university students. Very, very successful program. We are excited about the opportunity to partner with Slippery Rock University.
Thank you. Just real quick, how many students would you say, do you know, have a number offhand participating?
I do. Currently, we have one student participating. Our numbers are lower this year just based on the amount of students that are actually participating in our program here on campus. As you know, many students have elected to enroll in our cyber program, and those students are not attending. So we only have one student this semester.
Understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brado. And for those of you that might be dialing in and not seeing the dashboard, Jerry Miller is our Director of Special Education. So thank you, Mr. Miller, for responding. Mr. Widowson, please. I see you've got your hand raised.
Thank you. Returning to the Jewel litigation for just one moment, excuse me. My question, I guess, would be directed to Dr. Patel. Given the amount of work that the administration is doing constantly over weekends, evenings, is this litigation going to put an extra burden on our administrative staff that is just maybe going to sink the boat? You know, as I said before, we can load a boat so far, and then at some point it may begin to sink. And that's my concern. Are we going to be overworking staff for something that may have very little return benefit for the district?
Thank you, Mr. Widdowson. You're right. There may be a little bit of work. I intend to give most of that to Mr. Hoffman, I'll be honest. I'm sorry, but
Sorry, Matt.
if we win and the attorneys get fees, well, I'm giving you the work. Number one. Number two, there will be some data gathering, I'm sure, that we'll need to do, but Mr. Hoffman has also assured me that we will not need to be present in person, me or any other administrator, principals or otherwise, for this lawsuit by way of affidavit or anything like that, right, Mr. Hoffman? I want to get you on record.
That is correct. Our effort is going to be gathering and providing data and documents in relation to that data.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Widowson. Anything else on that topic?
Just a quick question to Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman, would you foresee any circumstances that administrators would be required to appear at a deposition in federal court?
No, again, this is a mass action, so there are certain cases that are going to be tried as representative of the variety of cases. Per the court order, you have to volunteer for that effort. I don't think Dr. Vitale and her team are going to be doing that. So again, per the court order, our efforts are going to be limited to the provision of data.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Widowson. I do have one question on these items, but I'll just one last check to see if there's anyone else, any other member of the board. I apologize, I didn't mention this to you prior to Dr. Vitale, or it might be Ms. Boback, but the addition to our agenda this evening from our work session last week, folks, is the racial engagement strategies proposal. It's a topic that had really been in the forefront of a lot of our meetings months ago, maybe lifetimes ago, sort of pre-COVID, but it's with regards to how we approach diversity, inclusion, and engagement at Seneca Valley. I think I know the answer to this, so that's why I think I'm comfortable asking Dr. Vitale. Just if you could give a little color on that relationship. It's an important part of, and the individual that's within this organization is an important part of how we as a district are proactive on this topic. So Dr. Vitale, if you wouldn't mind, just a brief overview.
Thank you. And then I will ask Ms. Boback to add more details, but this proposal was given to us to extend the work that we already started with Dr. Gadsden several years ago. We did some intensified work last year with Dr. Gadsden, who owns Racial Engagement Strategies. Dr. Gadsden is an expert in the field in diversity, equity, and inclusion. This would continue to extend our work for more training for our administrators, training for our teachers, and a number of other strategies that we are looking for input, and we've already begun to do this in community meetings that we've invited parents alum, current staff members, and especially making sure that we have people of color at the table. You know, sometimes we do diversity work in all white school districts and only bring white people to the table. And that's not the case this time. We are really engaging our people of color in the district, in the community, students, alum, and parents. And so we are looking for, and we had a meeting, I think it was last week, Mr. Roberts led a virtual meeting. Mr. Peterson was there, but we are looking for feedback on different types of strategies that we're using to make sure that we are hitting this topic with fidelity, and that we're not just talking about the topics of diversity, equity, inclusion, but we're actually designing actionable steps to make sure that we're examining our curriculum. You heard our alum present about wanting more people of color in our ranks, in our staff, in our teaching staff, in our administrative staff. And so all of these things are topics that are addressed in this proposal. But Ms. Boback, if you want to add anything else about the operations of this proposal.
Yes, good evening. Yeah, as mentioned by Dr. Vitale, we have worked with Dr. Triskachson for several years, but more intentionally and more focused last school year as part of work with the leadership district team and just training us to kind of on common term vocabulary and really developing a district-wide approach of incorporating diversity, equity, inclusion into our daily operations. This proposal, it's kind of just taking it to that next level. It's now the heavy lifting. We have lots of work to do, but there are 5 areas of focus that are outlined in the proposal. And obviously action plans that fall underneath each one of those 5 areas of focus. But the areas of focus are, just to add on to what Dr. Vitale mentioned, you know, an assessment of the learning community, development of strategies to promote a more inclusive environment and school climate. We're going to be looking at training and professional development for staff. We are looking to work toward kind of enhancing our organizational development so that we could have it more equity-based, whether that's in the curriculum, in our hiring. We're also looking at just developing a stronger engagement with the community, as mentioned, so that we could have all voices heard and that we could kind of own our actions now. You know, she has led us to the point and trained us the bar, but now we are to do the work. So this is just taking that to the next level, and we have a lot to do from now until the end of June. So it's kind of outlined in the proposal this evening.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Boback. Thank you, Dr. Vitale. I just wanted to take a few minutes and focus on that. You know, obviously there's a lot going on in our world, and the pandemic is at the forefront, but this is still an issue that we need to be proactive and address. And I wanted to take a few minutes, especially considering we had 360 of you online this evening. I just wanted to take a moment, so thank you. Okay, I think we have a motion, we have a second, we've had discussion. Lisa, if you would please call the roll on items A through E.
Ms. Bradel,
Yes.
Mr. DiTullio,
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes.
Mr. Hester,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson, Mr. Widowson,
Yes.
and Mr. Nichol.
Yes,
Motion carries with 8 in the affirmative and 1 absent.
thank you, Lisa. We'll turn back to you, Mr. DiTullio, for item F in administration action items.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll make the motion that we approve the instructional model change for secondary students. This would be students in grades 7 to 12 will go back to the cohort model beginning on Wednesday, November 11th, 2020 through Monday, December 7th, 2020. Teachers will live stream in every class every day. The superintendent and school board will closely monitor the COVID-19 data and make adjustments as necessary. The superintendent continues to have the authority to temporarily close individual schools or change instructional models based on the emergency authorization given to her in a public vote by the board on August 2020.
Thank you for the motion, Mr. DiTullio. I will actually second that motion. So we have our motion and second. So folks, this is the reason that most of you are online this evening. As I said just a moment ago, this is what's been forefront in the world of public education, amongst other things that are going on in our country. So folks, I've organized a couple of thoughts. I will just take a minute or two, then I will leave it to, and we'll have some discourse and some deliberation around our table here on members of the board. But I thought I'd start off, folks, by letting you know that as of, I believe it was 6:15 this evening, we received an additional dozen or more than a dozen emails from parents in the district. Now, that is in addition to, and as I flip through my agenda, it looks like we had 7 or 8 items of communication. There was probably a few more than that, but, and folks, within that email, the chain of emails, there were, at least 6 or 7 or 8 of them that were, individuals, parents, stakeholders in our district who said, absolutely, positively, I want my child to have the option to be in school 5 days a week. There were a few in there that were looking at the absolute other end of the spectrum as it relates to their opinion. And in some of the different correspondence we've received, there were a number of those as well. So the point I'm trying to make to all of you is that for every one of you who says, I absolutely want my child back 5 days a week, there is someone who is of the exact opposite opinion. And, in sort of that sort of network of relationships, you may have the opinion of 5 days a week and 2 or 3 or 4 of your friends may feel the same way. But I assure you, this is a topic upon which our district and the stakeholders in our district are divided. And I would tell you that, I don't know if I'd say the right word is easy, but to choose one or the other is a little bit of the path of least resistance. The more difficult path, which is the one that we, the 9 members of us here on your board, need to strike, is to balance as best we can the thoughts, the opinions of people on either end of that spectrum, and look at that in conjunction with the data, which Dr. Vitale gave you a very thorough update on all of that data. And I'll start, well, not start, I've already started, but I will tell you that I am supportive of this motion. Dr. Vitale and I have been in pretty constant contact for what seems like months, certainly, within the last week or 2, as we've seen some of the numbers spike. And I am supportive of this motion. And I'll tell you that one of the key parts of my support is the fact that Butler County has been moved into this substantial designation and the recommendation there of hybrid or full remote. Now, some of you on the line may second guess and say, well, Mr. Nickel, even in the moderate stage, there was a recommendation of hybrid, or I can't remember if it was full remote. But to Dr. Vitale's point, we have local control. We see the recommendations made. We decide how we want to respond to those recommendations. And I'm simply telling you that moving from the moderate category and thinking of the sort of the community around us and moving to substantial is one of my reasons for moving to a level of cohort. Now, on the other end of that, as she also pointed out on our dashboard, you can see the case numbers that are out there in our senior high school, our intermediate high school, Ryan Glora Middle versus, and I don't mean to sort of juxtapose them against each other, but at Evans City, at CVE, at Rowan, and at Hain, both the K through 4 and the 5-6 components of those buildings, for about 3,000 students, we have virtually no reported cases. There's 1 student and 1 staff member. And when I talk about balance, my goal in as safe a way as possible is to keep as many of our students in person for instruction for as long as possible. But again, given that we've moved into this substantial designation, I think that it's prudent to move to the cohort for our 7 through 12. Now, I also want you to think about, and Dr. Vitale alluded to it, but one of my reasons for wanting to keep our students in person as much as we possibly can has to do with their mental health. And it's something that, parents of students who they say they want to be 5 days a week have said again and again and again, being virtual, being isolated is affecting my son or daughter's mental health. And I understand that. What has been, unfortunately, an unintended consequence of our move to the 5-day-a-week and more of a challenge to keep our students socially distanced is, as Dr. Vitale mentioned, all the contact tracing that we're doing as a district has led to, with some of the different, Department of Health changes of mind with regards to plexiglass and masks. She mentioned that there was, over the weekend, we had a number of 180 students who were quarantined. Well, that number, and I think she mentioned it earlier, is up over 400. And I have a level of concern about those 400 students and the quarantine, which my understanding is they are isolated, they're in their home, it's 14 days, and it's having a negative effect on their mental health. So on one hand, I'm thinking of being prudent and moving to the cohort model so that we can better protect. I think of that in the context of if we move forward in the cohort model and we can keep some of our students a little more physically distanced, that we may not have as many young men and young women isolated in quarantine. But I also, on the flip side, am thinking of the 3,000 plus students in kindergarten through 6th grade who I want them as much as possible in front of their teacher and with that teacher, with the paraprofessionals that are affecting their education. And given the numbers as we see them in our buildings today, I am supportive of taking this step to both be prudent, but also try and keep as many of our students in front of their teachers for as often as we can keep them in front of our teachers. So that was some points that I had organized in my head. I hope I walked through them reasonably well with you. I'll be candid with you, and you may hear some comments this evening. We will have a consensus. There will be a vote at the end of this dialogue, but we all have different places that we're all coming from individually, all 9 of us. And Ms. Whittle is not able to join us this evening, but there are varying opinions. And I want to respect all those opinions because I think ultimately what we need to find is a way to come to some level of consensus. We need to find a way to attain that balance. It may not be the balance that each and every one of us individually feels is the right way to approach it, but we do have what I believe will end up being a consensus this evening. My hope is that it is in support of this motion as it's been moved and seconded by Mr. DiTullio and myself. So I will step back. I'm expecting some active dialogue this evening. I'll look around. Let me move over on my screen so that I can see Mr. Hester and Mr. Widowson. I'll start with Mr. Hester. You've got your hand raised. Please let us hear what's on your mind.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I do appreciate it. I woke up this morning to the Pfizer news, fabulous news. They announced that they've got a vaccine that they believe is 90% effective. And what that now gives us after 8 months of this horrid pandemic that we've gone through, it gives us hope. It gives us a feeling that the end is near, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And so I support this measure as it's stated. However, I think we need to continue to follow the recommendations of the experts, of the science, and understand that we are all need to be protected. And I think this doesn't go far enough. I think we really need to look at the elementary schools. I know we're not seeing many cases there, but I believe a lot of that is because pediatricians and the doctors for these young children are not having kids tested. We hear that often. They're not having tested because the test is traumatic to them, number one. Number two, it doesn't seem to affect these younger kids very much. And I appreciate all that. However, it does not alleviate the situation that they could be asymptomatic. Because of that, I feel that we need to seriously look at going to the COVID model for the elementary schools too. I know that's not on the table right now, but I do support this measure, but I do feel we need to seriously look at the elementary school before it gets too bad, before the tests start showing up, before the positives start showing up, and we have to go to full remote, because quite honestly, the cohort model is much better than the full remote model because of the contact they have with each other and with their teachers. So once again, Mr. President, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Mr. Hester. I'll look to Mr. Widowson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Nickel. I would have to speak in support of Mr. Hester, what he just articulated. Pardon me. I think the motion is good as far as it goes, but we need to continue to listen to the experts, which it's the Department of Health, it's the Department of Education. And just to kind of give an analogy, our board listens very closely to our solicitor when we're looking for legal advice because he is the expert in the field. And I'm really hard pressed to think of a time that we haven't taken advice from our solicitor. And when we're looking to issue some bonds or refinance bonds, we bring in our financial experts and we take their advice and we listen to it. But then we turn around and we choose to disregard the advice of the experts, the Department of Health and the Department of Education, that are saying that it should be either cohort or full remote. They didn't say, what they didn't say was cohort or full remote with the exception of the elementary. And I'm hard pressed to understand why we take advice from some experts and then we choose to ignore others. The other thing that concerns me is the elementary schools. Social distancing is pretty much laughable when we talk about it. We have the buses that are full. The kids get off, they immediately go in, and most of them get their breakfast and they go into the classroom. They're shoulder to shoulder. And of course, in order to eat, they have to take their mask off. And then they're leaning back in their chair, which basically eliminates any protection that the plexiglass would give because they're not in it. And I understand that we don't have any cases right now. And as Mr. Hester articulated and Dr. Patel, is it the fact that a lot of pediatricians are just saying, okay, they're showing some signs, let's just keep them home for 14 days. We also have a duty to protect all of our staff, all of the hardworking individuals that are in these elementary schools and are working their tails off. We need to give them the same protections and the same guidelines that we are looking to give to the 7 and 12. It's going to be a hard vote. I support because I don't want to negatively impact the 7 to 12, but as of right now, I can't support the motion the way it stands unless we would include the elementary schools, and I understand that that is not part of the motion now, so I would speak against this motion as it stands now. Thank you, Mr. Nichol. Thank you, board.
I appreciate your perspective. Thank you for your comments. I'll turn to my colleagues around the table. Ms. Bradle, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay. So when the announcement came today that we were put in the substantial phase, and I looked at the agenda, I knew this decision was going to be hard. I've thought from like 8 o'clock this morning until now exactly how I would respond to this. In my heart, I think the best thing is for all students to be in school in person, not just the K through 6 students. All students need that engagement. I feel as a district, we've offered our parents other alternatives if they did not want to send their kids to school. They have cyber, or they could live stream. And I know that there were people that, you know, felt that by sending their kids to school, they were making the most of it and they were comfortable with that. And as a parent of 3 children, I don't have any longer in the district, but I would be sending my kids to school. Considering we have 7,000 plus students, 800 plus staff, our infection rate has been minimal. It's not something we should dismiss by any means, but I think we have done a really good job at mitigating the transmission. We can't say for sure that it hasn't entirely been school transmission, but I think we feel pretty confident it has been more community transmission than anything. And in my mind, you know, we don't know yet if the cohort model will really drop these numbers. We believe they will, but we've seen other districts, although we're always told let's not compare ourselves, to other districts, but they've been in the cohort model and they're still seeing high numbers of quarantine. I think that as if we go into the cohort model, community transmission is still going to exist. Parents are going to still send their kids to extracurriculars, athletics, and it's not going to end, excuse me. But, you know, the deciding factor for me and what changed my mind was hearing Dr. Vitel's update and the number in quarantine. And that is concerning. So I will support the motion for 7 through 12. However, I don't believe the data supports K through 6. And I would like to see the K through 6 students remain in person. One favor I would ask of the administration is if you could add the quarantine numbers to the dashboard. I think that's important for our community to see how many students we have out. Because when they look at the dashboard, they're just seeing right now 17 total active cases. So in some people's minds, that's the only numbers that are out. And in ending, I would just like to say thank you to the staff, the entire staff, the administrators, the teachers, the custodians, everyone. You have done a phenomenal job. And I'm so proud that we're at the point we're at right now, that we've actually had students full-time in person, and you should be commended. So again, a very hard decision, but going with my heart.
Thank you, Ms. Bradle. Ms. Harrison, please.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Nickel. I agree with Leslie. I think everybody wants to see their children in school 5 days a week. The growth of the cases at the senior high school, the secondary, is worrisome. We haven't seen it at the elementary, and you hate to split the district like that. And I definitely don't want one part of the staff to feel differently than the other part of the staff, because we appreciate everything they've done. But I think in all sense, 7 through 12 probably at this point needs to go to the cohort. But I don't think the numbers, if you look at the numbers, they just aren't there for the elementary. So I think them staying in 5 days a week is fine.
Thank you.
The teachers have done a fantastic job. The stress they've been under in every district across the state, whatever mode they're in, has been tremendous. And they've done a very good job at everything. They really have. We have to appreciate that. So I do agree with the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. President. There's just so much we don't know about this. We look at the outbreak, the trimodal distribution of cases, it's climbing, it's climbing, it's climbing, it's climbing. Got horrible numbers were reported out today. But you know, tomorrow that could peak. It could start going back down. There's no way to know. One of the other things we just don't know is why this disease does not seem to impact younger children. We don't know what the outcome of people who get this disease is. There are people now who are weeks and months out who are reporting all kinds of signs and symptoms of illness that we don't understand. It's insidious. It's invisible to us. You know, if we had an outbreak of measles and we had kids running around with bright red rashes, I have to think there's a lot of people that would want us to react to that. If we had an outbreak of chickenpox and we had kids running around with weeping sores, I think people would want us to react to that. If we had pertussis and we had kids racked with coughing, I have to think people would want us to react to that. What we have is something that's very hard to react to because you can't see it. And indeed, its most infectious period is before any sorts of symptoms break out. So the point was made tonight that we can either react to a bad situation once we recognize it, or we can try to prevent a bad situation from happening. And I think what this motion embodies is a strategy for preventing something bad from happening to our students and to our staff, which is an incredibly important concept to grasp as we decide how we're going to vote. The science is evolving. The science might say to us in a couple of weeks that we can go back to normal. This period that we've picked out, it's a couple of weeks. It's got a holiday in the middle of it. Dr. Vitale and the senior administrations have the authority that we've given them to pivot on a dime if that becomes appropriate. So I think not only is this a good strategy to prevent, as opposed to react, to prevent further outbreaks and illnesses among our students and staff, but it also provides us with the ability to logistically and mechanically adapt very quickly as the conditions in the environment might change. So my vote will be in favor of the motion.
Thank you for your commentary, Mr. Peterson. Anyone else around the board? Mr. DiTilio, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll start out by saying that I was probably, I don't know if I could say that I was the biggest proponent for 5 days, but I was one of them because I do think that that is the best way to educate kids, definitely K through 6, but also 7 to 12. And I can say as a parent who has someone in each of the buildings on the secondary campus, it was good for my kids to come back. I think that they were getting the best educational experience possible being here 5 days a week. If you would ask me on Friday if I would have been in support of changing our model, I would have said no, because 5 days would have been fine. We had low numbers, manageable numbers, but what happened over the weekend was troubling. But what really convinced me that we needed to do this on the secondary campus is the fact that we went from 180 kids on the senior campus quarantine to 400. A lot of that we can blame on, we had physical barriers in place and rules changed, from the Department of Health and what we thought was going to work the best for 5-day-a-week learning. And it was changed where the plexiglass wasn't sufficient anymore. The wearing a mask wasn't a guarantee anymore. The 15 minutes at a time with unexposed or without it being masked became 15 minutes throughout the day. I mean, there were a lot of changes that happened. To Mr. Peterson's point, we're learning every day and things are changing every day. This is something that I never would have thought I would say, let's do this on the secondary campus. But because of what I've seen, we've affected basically what's the equivalent of 70% of one of our classes. One of our graduating classes is like 570. We have 400 kids, which is almost an entire graduating class that have to quarantine for 14 days. And that's not just keeping them away from school, but if, these are kids on the secondary campus, a lot of them are going to work, play club sports. And granted, sports are not everything. However, they are important to kids that are in this campus. So they can't do that. They can't go to work. There's a lot of those types of things, and then it's affecting their family. So you can have 400 kids whose families are now affected because they're quarantining. So trying to get that under control, trying to minimize that over the next 3 weeks, I believe it's the right thing to do at this point. I also am in agreement, the K through 6, those kids definitely need in-person instruction. At this point, there's not enough numbers there that say that we should change that model. To address some of the other issues, we have experts in-house, Mr. Peterson being one of them. Who would have ever thought, that would be something that would be attributable to a school board that would help us out with your experience in infectious disease. Never in a million years would I have thought that. Dr. Vitale being on the Butler Health System Board and having that ability and those resources that we've been able to use so that we can look at not a state one-size-fits-all solution, but we can look and see what's right for our community, what's right for our district. This recommendation, I'm completely in support of, and I think it's the right thing. And again, as Mr. Peterson had mentioned, if things need to change, we have the right administration, we have the right people here that can make that determination that we have to do a pivot again. So I'm completely in agreement with this one as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. DiTullio. I think the last member of our board we haven't heard from is Mr. Jacobs. Not that you need to make comment. I just want to make sure you're not forgotten out there in case you had some thoughts you wanted to convey to the members of the board.
Thank you, sir. I don't have much to add. I agree with a lot of what the board members have expressed. I'll steal Mr. Peterson's line, perhaps that this is a novel virus that he rightfully so reminds us of, which means it's new. Newer still is how it reacts in schools. And I think what we're seeing, at least in our district, is that the measures that we've put in place are very effective in limiting, perhaps not limiting, but limiting transmission within the schools. And I want to make it very clear that we still believe those measures are effective in both secondary and elementary. This divergence, if you will, between secondary and elementary is not because they're more effective one place or the other, but rather some of those measures like contact tracing and isolation and the like are different to administer in a secondary environment and an elementary environment. And so for that reason, though it was not our intended plan and though it was not ideal, I am supportive of cohort and secondary and remaining full-time instruction for elementary. Thank you, Mr. Nickel.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Just one more look around the room in case there's any follow-up. Ms. Harrison?
Just one thing, I just want to make it clear, and if anything would happen at the elementary level, similar actions would be taken if necessary, that we're not ignoring them and saying, oh, they're fine and everything's good.
No, for sure. I mean, that's the comment I was going to wrap with was,
Right.
To remind folks that in our motion, it's specifically saying that this is through Monday, December 7th, which for those of you who are online, the magic of that date is that that's our next board meeting is December 7th. I'm conscious of people like to have some sense of what am I going to be faced with in the longer term, which is probably more than a month. But we do, for all of you out there, need to revisit this topic. We need to see, what's happened with the numbers around us and all the different data as of December 7th. And if that means that we need to pivot in the elementary side of our school district, then we will. That might be being proactive, but as we outline in the end of this motion, that Dr. Vitale's emergency authorization that we've given her, if she needs to perhaps look at a school closure in K through 6, then that's certainly something that she will be considering. Or secondary. Well,
Yes.
exactly. Well, and the fact remains that Ryan Gloyer and the senior high school are closed this week. So that could happen, absolutely.
Okay.
I appreciate you making the point.
Yep.
Mr. Peterson.
Mr. Nickel, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention one thing. And in saying this, I'm not looking to amend the motion.
Okay.
But I would ask that the school makes special note as we go back to non-5-day-a-week schedules, that the school makes special note of students who have special needs, who are in that sort of third category of the therapies and the mental health interventions and all of those kinds of things that nobody ever thinks about but happen every day at school, that if there are kids who go from 5 to 2 and need more support, that those kids can get that support. That's a request, not a suggestion to change the motion.
No, I appreciate making the note, and it's something I'm sure is on the minds of our leadership, inclusive of Mr. Miller, our Director of Special Ed. Please, Mr.
One more
DiTullio.
question, and I guess it's more of a clarification. The Wednesday, November 11th date is when Ryan Gloyer was coming back anyway. That was the last day. So just so I'm clear on what this means for the senior high building, since it is 11-12, will that start cohort this week, or are we going to keep it closed through Friday and then start next week with that building?
We have prepared a letter with all of these details that will go to parents tonight if the board approves. And it will have all of that in there. But I can tell you that the senior high needs to remain out this week because of the number of cases. As well as I know there was some confusion. I saw at least one parent said, well, I don't understand why was Ryan Gloyer closed 14 days, whereas the senior high was closed 5 with 2 weekends in there. So that really was a 9-day closure. And I think it's important to remember that the district is not trying to be inconsistent, but we are trying to take everything into context. What we had at Ryan Gloyer was a number of teachers and students on the same team. We needed to slow down the transmission. And that was a recommendation by the Department of Health. What we have at the senior high is no clear connections. We don't, they're spread out across the senior high building. We don't have any definitive school-to-school transmission. So you can go a little less time on that one, but we need to finish senior high being on remote learning all this week. And then we'll start them on cohort next Monday coming up. We'll explain all of that in details. We started drafting this letter. We need a little bit of time after this meeting, but we'll have it finished. I also want to explain in regards to special education, our life skills students are students that need and are in pull-out situations with significant exceptionalities. They, even in the cohort model, came 4 days a week, and we'll continue that as well. But then there are also these ancillary services that learning support children get, and our teachers, we've gotten very good. I know that cohort is not perfect, but we've gotten much better than when we ran cohort in the fall. All schools have, especially with the live streaming aspect, which was not easy for our teachers and continues not to be easy to do in person and live streaming at the same time. It's like teaching 2 classes at once, but you can't see one the entire time. The other piece I want to address is in regards to Ms. Bradle's comment. I have to be honest that it will be difficult to post all the quarantine numbers all the time and keep them updated. I have to be open with you about that, and I'll tell you why. When we were asked by a board member to begin the tracker, early on, we saw some districts doing that, and many districts paid upwards of $15,000 to create a district tracker. Our technology department did it without us contracting that out. It took time. It took a computer programmer at least 48 hours to put that together. That's 48 hours that he's not working with our teachers to provide them support and our tech department. I'm the one updating the tracker, I'll be honest, working with Nurse Williams. Today, Dr. McCarty, Dr. McKinley did it for me, but when I'm working on that tracker and trying to keep it up to date Saturday, Sunday, and all hours of the day, I'm not working on other things for the district, and I will do what this board tells me to do, but there is only so much time. Staff members in this district, and I am not whining, it's what I signed up for. Teachers, administrators, we're working 7 days a week, 14, 15-hour days, and I'm not exaggerating. I think you know that. You're getting emails at 3 a.m, 5 a.m. People aren't sleeping. That is not healthy for this organization. So we will do our best to put quarantine numbers, but you have to understand, some of those quarantines are home quarantines, that maybe they're on quarantine because mom got it, dad got it, grandma got it, and DOH has asked them to quarantine. We know of some of those. We don't know of all of those. Some of those are as a result of a possible exposure at school. We know those numbers, but they change every day. Everyone has different timelines. And there's another quarantine notice that will go out tonight, which is frustrating. We're looking at 30, 40 kids in that quarantine. And so, I appreciate the board's comments, but I have to let you know when Mr. Widdowson says, how much more work can we put on people? Again, I'm not whining. Everyone knows how hard our teachers work and how hard our administrators work, but there is a breaking point. So we will do our best in trying to get the quarantine numbers on the dashboard. I cannot promise you it will be updated every day. I cannot promise you it will be completely accurate every day, but we'll do our best so that our public is aware.
Thank you, Dr. Vitale. Look around the room virtually and otherwise one more time. I think we've probably gotten to everyone. So we have a motion, a second. We've had our deliberation, our dialogue. Lisa, would you please take the roll on item F?
Mr. Jacobs,
Yes.
Mr. Hester,
Yes.
Mr. DiTullio,
Yes.
Ms. Bradle,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Widdowson,
This is a difficult motion to vote on. I support the motion because I think it's essential that 7 through 12 go into the cohort. However, given the way that it's worded, I don't think it goes far enough. So given that circumstance, and I'd like to make sure that the secretary records that I'm voting no because I do not think the motion goes far enough. I think it should include K through 6, so therefore my vote would be no on the motion.
Thank you. Ms. Harrison?
Yes.
Mr. Nichol?
Yes.
Motion carries with 7 in the affirmative, 1 no vote, and 1 absent.
Thank you, Lisa. With that, we will move on to the other business of the district. We have a few instruction items. Ms. Harrison, if you'd walk us through those, please.
Yes. Tonight, I'd like to make a motion to approve the following 2 instruction items. First is conferences. Approved conferences is provided in the backup. And the second item is grant disbursement. Grant permission to apply for and disperse, if approved, the Helping Kids Mini Grant Program funded by Sourcewell and the School Superintendent's Association, AASA, in the amount of $2,500 to further equity in the virtual learning environment and offset the cost of Wi-Fi hotspots for families in need, requested by Ms. Annie Mersing, Director of Advancement.
Thank you for the motion, Ms. Harrison. Is there a second for those items?
I will second that.
Thank you, Mr. DiTullio. Just one point of note. So I think everybody on the board has seen this, but to remind you and for those listening online, that the 2 conference requests are actually both virtual. So just a point of note. Is there any discussion, any questions in regards to these 2 instruction action items? Mr.
President,
DiTullio, please.
I just want to thank Ms. Mersing for going out, finding this grant, and applying for it. Something that we have to keep in mind is one of the things that the district is trying to do is those children that don't have good internet connections in their area, we've been able to go out and procure these types of grants so that they will have a hotspot so that they can still participate in virtual schooling. So great job, Ms. Mersing. Thank you for finding it. And, hopefully it'll be something we'll be able to use quickly.
Thank you, Mr. DiTullio. Anyone else? Seeing none, Lisa, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Widdowson?
Yes.
Mr. DiTullio?
Yes.
Mr. Hester?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Ms. Bradel?
Yes.
Ms. Harrison?
Yes.
Mr. Nichol?
Yes.
Motion carries with 8 in the affirmative and 1 absent.
Thank you very much. We'll turn to business and finance action items. Mr. Jacobs, if you would, please.
I will make a motion to approve the following business and finance actions. December bills, authorize the administration to pay the December bills. Supplies and equipment's bids, authorize administration to seek bids for supplies and equipment for the 2021-2022 school year. Joint purchasing agreement for MIU4, approve the joint purchasing agreement with the Midwestern Intermediate Unit 4 for 2021, included in the backup. 4th item is budget transfers, approve the budget transfers as noted in the backup. Artificial turf contract award, approve Field Turf USA Inc. through Keystone Purchasing Network KPN vendor agreement for the installation of artificial turf at the upper middle school practice field in the amount of $795,065.22. The solicitor has reviewed and approved the final agreement, which is included in the backup. The last item for the evening is the Hope Learning Center agreement. Approve the Hope Learning Center agreement to provide school-based access services through the 2020-21 school year as included in the backup.
Thank you for the motion, Mr. Jacobs. May we have a second for that motion? Mr. Peterson, thank you. Does anyone have any questions with regards to these business and finance action items? Okay, seeing none, Lisa, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bradel?
Yes.
Mr. DiTullio?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Hester?
Yes.
Ms. Harrison?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Widdowson?
Yes.
Mr. Nichol?
Yes.
Motion carries with 8 in the affirmative and 1 absent.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll turn to personnel action. Mr. Widdowson, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Nichol. Tonight, under personnel action, I'd like to make a motion to approve the appointments, contracted services, leaves, and retirements. These items having been discussed in executive session earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Widdowson. Thank you for the motion. Is there a second for these items?
Second.
Ms. Bradel, thank you. Given we've had our discussion, we'll move immediately to the roll call. Lisa.
Mr. Peterson. Mr. Hester.
Yes.
Mr. DiTullio.
Yes.
Ms. Harrison.
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs.
Yes.
Ms. Bradel.
Yes.
Mr. Widowson.
Yes.
Mr. Nichol.
Yes.
Motion carries with 8 in the affirmative and 1 absent.
Thank you very much. We note A through H pieces of communication. I mentioned earlier, we received another dozen plus earlier today. Before we move to adjournment, I think, Mr. DiTullio, you had one point you wanted to make?
Yes, it's actually a few different points, but it's all related to PSERS. We had the ballot drawing of lots for ballot placement on Friday. So my name will actually be first on the ballot out of the two. So, for whatever that's worth. Also, the update on the PSERS board election is they're working on compiling the list still of all school board members in the Commonwealth. It'll probably be a couple more weeks before they can get that finalized. And then after that, the timeline for the election is it has to be done by the end of the year. So, hopefully it'll be before Christmas, but who knows on that. The one other thing I'd like to mention is we actually have a meeting on Thursday virtually to determine our asset allocation for the PSERS fund, which is the $58 billion pension fund. What we're talking about doing, or what's being negotiated by some of the political folks on the board, is to move the assumed return rate down lower than what it is. While that might sound good, one of the things it does is it has an immediate impact on the PSERS rate that we're going to pay. And it's to the effect of $283 million per year, or $6.9 billion over 30 years that is going to come to the taxpayer. So very similar to what we had about a decade ago with the PSER rate increasing. This will definitely push it above 40% sooner rather than later. And in the meantime, it's a 6% PSER increase to us as a district, or to all districts across the Commonwealth. But we have to come up with another $283 million as a state. And as you know, right now is not the time that we have good revenue coming in. So this is going to exacerbate all those problems. So there is a meeting on Thursday. If you're interested in watching it or getting in touch with the PSER members, if you go to the PSERS page, you'll see who the board members on. They have contact information. Like I said, I'm the only one representing the school board members, but there are others on the board. The state treasurer, secretary of banking, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats from each the House and Senate. All those folks you can get in touch with as well, and to push them to not approve this revised asset allocation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DiTullio. Mr. Peterson, please.
Before we adjourn, Mr. Nichol, could I extend a hearty hip hip hooray to the Seneca Valley boys soccer team?
Absolutely. We didn't talk
In
about
the words
that.
of Freddie Mercury,
Field
they
champions.
are the champions.
They are the champions. Yeah.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks. I appreciate you giving us something light to talk about at the end. Unless there's anything else, Mr. Widowson, please. I see you've got your hand raised.
Very quickly, Mr. Hester and I are on the Transportation Committee. I got a call recently regarding a school bus issue. And just a thank you to Mr. Pearson. I reached out to Mr. Pearson, and he and I got together and met with the people that were concerned. And Mr. Pearson, through very quick work, got the situation very quickly under control. So I just wanted to reach out and say thank you to him publicly for his quick response in getting an issue resolved.
Always like a shout out for Mr. Pearson. Thank you, Mr. Widowson. So as we wrap, I think there are about still 200 of you online, and I'm fairly certain that with the motion that we passed, there are, the original 350 plus, and the parents in our district, there are a lot of people who are unhappy this evening, and hopefully some people that are on the other end of that happy in some fashion. I can assure you that while I may have some differences of opinion with members of our board, I know that each and every member of the board comes from a place of trying to do what they think is best for your sons, your daughters, for the teachers that are in our buildings every day. And so, again, we may and we will always have times where we agree to disagree, but we are all looking out as best we think we can for your sons and daughters and the people in the district. So Thank you all, the 200 or so of you that are still here. You're welcome anytime. With that, I will seek a motion to adjourn. So, Mr. DiTilio, second. Mr. Peterson, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for being part of the meeting this evening.